I can tell the House, Mr. Speaker, that in the year to March 2025, there were around 57,000 routine releases from prison. In that same time, there were 262 releases in error from prison. New data my department published today shows that from April to the end of October this year, there were 91 releases in error from prison. Further data on the breakdown of offences are official statistics that need to be combed through in detail before being put into the public domain. This was not a publication due today, but we recognise the public interest in being transparent about the overall number. It's important to note that this may be revised as additional cases are subsequently recorded, but this is the very latest that I have been provided. We understand that there are 3 mistakenly released prisoners currently lawfully at large. Their prison records show none of these are convicted sex offenders. I have been informed, Mr. Speaker, this afternoon that HMPPS are investigating a further case of a potential release in error on the 3rd of November who may still be at large. It is symptomatic of the data issues we inherited that all this information I have been given at this time while police and HMPPS investigate. Of the confirmed cases, Case 1 was in prison for failing to surrender to the police and released in error in December 2024. Case 2 was in a prison for a Class B drug offence and released in error in August 2024. And Case 3 was in prison for aggravated burglary and released in error in June 2025. 2 are a British national and 1 is a foreign national offender. I will not provide any further details on individual cases. In each case, we have to consider the welfare of victims and the judgment of our law enforcement agencies. Of the 262 releases in error from prison in the year to March 2025, 87 were of offenders whose main offence was violence against the person, and 3 whose main offence was a sexual offence. I'm clear that we must bear down on these numbers, which are symptomatic of a prison system under horrendous strain. As the Shadow Justice Secretary admitted last week, the state of the prison service has been unacceptable for a very long time, including under the Conservative government. Prisons today are still struggling with violence. The safety and custody statistics show an 8% rise in the rate of assaults in the year to June 2025. Systems are archaic. Every prisoner's sentence is worked out on paper, considering the type of offence and the legislation covered by it. Mr. Speaker, there are more than 500 pages of sentence management guidance. Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to prison officers doing an incredibly important job. But as the Prison Officers Association has said, prisons throughout the country are underfunded, they're understaffed, and they're operating under relentless strain. Frontline prison officers were cut by a quarter between 2010 and 2017. That's around 6,000 fewer people, and means that there are less experienced staff, which places more pressure on the system. And unsurprisingly, mistakes happen in those circumstances. Indeed, from 2010-11 to the end of 23-24, under the previous government, there were 860 known releases in error from prison. We must recognise the distress caused to victims, knowing that the person who harmed them is free when they should be behind bars. In the worst cases, like William Fernandez back in 2021, prisoners have committed further horrific offences. I give an unequivocal apology to all who have faced worry or worse as a result of releases in error, especially Hadesh Kabatu's victims, who I'm offered to meet. I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman, Mr. Speaker, I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite will join me in that apology to all who have suffered because of releases in error under this and previous governments. Mr. Speaker, human error will always exist, and no Justice Secretary could prevent every mistake. But we must reduce the risk and reverse the trend over the course of this Parliament. But we must be honest, the release process requires a radical overhaul, and establishing the facts in individual cases is complex. Decisions about public statements rightly rest with the police. Issuing details too early could frustrate covert inquiries or put police officers or the public at risk. These are judgments for experienced operational leaders, and parliamentarians must give them the space to make them. Mr. Speaker, this is a complex issue. We must be straight with the public about that, and I'm clear that we have a mountain to climb in response. So first, I'm chairing a new Justice Performance Board. It will give a comprehensive view of prisons and criminal court performance, including releases in error, to drive a step change in how we respond. The first monthly meeting took place yesterday. Secondly, I'm making sure we understand the issues. Following the release of Kabatu, I asked Damien Owens to carry out a review. This will conclude by the end of February next year. It will now include the adequacy of data collected and published on releases in error, and we fully expect to uncover additional incidents. I can also announce that we will set up a team of data scientists to review historic releases in error to understand what's going wrong. Third, I'm improving processes, because some of these errors actually originated not in the prison process, but in the court process. I will implement an urgent warrant query unit supported by court experts so that prisons can escalate queries and get rapid clarifications to reduce the risk of releases in error that emanate from the court system. We're also issuing instructions to court staff to reinforce mandatory requirements for imprisoned orders, to be confirmed verbally with judges before finalising a measure which has been shared with the judiciary. The court and the prison service are also scoping a joint exercise to look at live warrants, initially taking place within the London region. It will identify errors and ensure prisoners are subject to the correct warrants. Fourth, I'm accelerating upgrades. I stood up a digital rapid response team last week to reduce human error with cutting-edge technology. Over the next 6 months, we will provide up to £10 million to deliver AI and technology solutions to help frontline staff avoid mistakes and support them to calculate sentences accurately. Finally, I'm simplifying the release policy. One of the aims of the sentencing bill is to standardise how cases are treated, and following Damien Owens' review, we will consider whether amendments are required to operational policy. These are the initial steps to address the issue, but I will update the House where further changes are necessary. I commend this statement to the House.
Right, can I just clear something up? And it's not got to happen. First of all, I was told Justice Secretary needed 30 minutes. Just bear with me. And I said, look, you need to ask. And in the end, the department came back and said, oh no, it's 10. It then wasn't 10, it was almost 12 minutes. I will work with Ministers and Secretary of State, but it is 10 minutes. If there needs to be an extension, please ask, don't keep changing the times, because in the end, it is unfair to shadow ministers when it goes over. So what I would say is, you've got an extra minute, you've got an extra half a minute, but please stick to the rules of 10. If you do need longer, I am always sympathetic as long as I know in advance. But to have this conversation with the department that it was no longer needed makes your department look foolish, and it certainly am not going to make me look foolish in the future. Shadow Justice Secretary.
So, Mr. Speaker, we're back here again then. At least the Justice Secretary gets some use out of his new suit. But where has Wednesday's bombast and bravado gone? Get a grip, man, he thundered last week, without even a hint of irony. None of that today, was there? And why is that? Well, it's because, like increasing numbers of criminals in our jails, the Justice Secretary just doesn't know whether he's coming or going. Even his colleagues in government are now turning on him, some with unbridled contempt. The handling is terrible, was the verdict of a cabinet minister. Just rank incompetence. Cowardly. Frankly, pretty dodgy, was the verdict of another. Before long, the Prime Minister will be saying he has full confidence in him. And we all know what that means. Look, 2 weeks ago, he came to the House and he said he had put in place the strongest checks ever to stop releases in error. 48 hours later, another prisoner with a history of sex offences was released in error. 7 days later, and a fraudster is let out the very day he was sentenced to 45 months inside. And today, he admits that he's lost another prisoner that same day. They're Lammy's lags, a whole new category of criminal who can just waltz out of prison despite having the strongest ever checks introduced by this Justice Secretary. The public are being endangered as this circus rumbles on, week after week, with no end in sight. When will he put a stop to it? He can't just hide behind the inquiry that he's commissioned. He couldn't even get the head of the review, Lynn Owens, name right last week. Anne Owens. Anne Owens, he bellowed. Well, I looked her up, and the only Anne Owens I could find was a panto performer who recently appeared in Alice in Wonderland. Perhaps she was the one who gave him some tips on his performance at the dispatch box last week. The former Chief Inspector of Prisons says that this has been caused, at least in part, by the confusion created by Labour's botched early release scheme. Does he now concede that there is a link between the doubling of prisoners accidentally released in the last year and the introduction of their SDS 40? Or is it just an extremely unlucky coincidence? Don't take us for fools. And Mr. Speaker, when will he finally come clean? He won't provide details in parliamentary questions. He won't answer even when he is here for Prime Minister's questions. He won't respond to letters. Well, perhaps that's because they weren't addressed to the Deputy Prime Minister. He's now been dragged here, kicking and screaming, to admit that one prisoner has been on the run from this Labour government for 14 months, and 91 have been accidentally released over the last 7 months. But the Justice Secretary is so clueless, he's literally lost track of how many prisoners he's lost. He says today a prisoner may have been accidentally released last Monday. Well, has he looked? He's either in his cell or he's not. What a complete and utter farce he's presiding over. As we all suspected, the crisis on his government's watch is even bigger than he dared admit. That's why he wouldn't say anything last week. Prisoners are being accidentally released nearly every other day and putting our constituents, his constituents, at risk. At this rate, he's on track for 156 prisoners to be accidentally released this year, which would be a record were it not for the doubling his government managed to achieve last year under their watch. And in his statement today, he poses more questions than he manages to answer. How many crimes were committed by those prisoners whilst they were on the run? Why can't he tell us who these 91 prisoners are? Who is the foreign criminal? And who is this mystery fourth offender he may have lost? How can he possibly be found if the public don't have his face? They don't have his name, like they did for Sharif and Kabatu. The public deserve to know the truth. And this situation could not be any more serious. There's been a 9-fold increase in the number of violent offenders accidentally released in the last year. A 9-fold increase. The criminal justice system, under his watch, has been made to look a total mockery. The public are being put at risk. In his own words, Mr. Speaker, it's time for him to get a grip or go. Yeah.